Hey dreamers, welcome back to a new episode of Izanami Island. I know that it's been a while since the last time we made a video, and that's because this episode really gave me a hard time. Today we're going to be working in some farm area on the island, and it was pretty difficult to put together. However, I did come up with something that I really liked and a method that I'm going to continue on throughout the series. I didn't get much done in this episode, but I really do like the turnout, and I think that we're going to be able to grow from this and expand out the city. Anyway guys, thanks for watching, and I really hope you guys enjoy the episode. Alright guys, like I said, this episode gave me a lot of trouble. So basically, I tried several different ways to get this accurate Japanese farm look. All throughout Japan, there's these rural areas with farm fields. Typically, they are in a rectangle shape, and they're surrounded by other residential areas that tend to be small yet are very dense. So I really wanted to get this look and put it into the city. My goal was to use this type of area to blend the industrial areas near the water with the main city of the residential and commercial and dense areas of the hustle and bustle of what this island is eventually going to be. Basically, it was going to be my little transition area, and I wanted to get it to look right. I wanted to get it to look like it does in real life. So typically throughout Japan, the fields that you're going to see are rice fields. When I first started looking at them, I was curious to why they're so small and rectangular shaped. So I looked it up. And basically what I found out was that the land was owned by different people. So each farm is small. Industrial farming in Japan is pretty rare and still small compared to the United States, of course. According to Google, on average in the United States, the average size of a farm is 445 acres. Whereas in Japan, they are typically about 3.1 hectares or 7.6 acres. So obviously much smaller. So initially when starting, I knew that the area that I wanted to work in was just going to be too spread out and too big. So I started splitting these areas up into quadrants. So when looking at Google Earth, I looked at these rice fields and they seem to be separated by two different things: roads and these small canals. So that was going to be the first thing that I tried to make. So I began putting down these canals that were part of this rice fields pack that were made by Tokachi 269. I really liked the way they looked. However, when they intersected with each other, they made this awful tear that I just didn't really like. And so eventually I kind of scrapped the idea to do it like this. So before I started this build, I pretty much thought that I was just going to use that rice fields pack that I mentioned earlier. However, I discovered pretty quickly, since they're props, they don't snap to the ground. And basically, if I want to use them, I have to be on flat ground, and that's just not going to be an option for this area. I think that it honestly looks unrealistic, and in real life, no farmland is going to be flat ground. So we're gonna have to figure something else out. So I colored in these rectangles using the surface painter, and even though I absolutely hated it initially, I just thought that I would go with it and start on some of the small residential areas, thinking that maybe that'll make it look better. Alright, so for these residential areas, I'm pretty much only using one asset. It's the Japanese low residential house pack. And when I say one asset, I guess I mean this one pack that comes with a ton of different assets. And the reason I'm mostly going to be using this one specifically is, one, it looks really good. And then two, they're pretty much already pre-built with the fences and then a lot of the shrubbery and things like that. They come in a lot of different shapes and sizes, and so they're going to be able to fit in unique ways into this area. And I just absolutely love them. So Asian cities, especially in Japan, don't tend to have a perfect grid or even necessarily a grid at all. So I'm trying to keep to that theme as I build the city. I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to build something that's pretty unique and also looks really good in the end product. All right, so with the residential houses, I have a ton of residential houses that I'm subscribed to on the Steam Workshop. There's a lot out there and there's a lot that look really, really good. However, most of them don't have any other like assets or like props that are built in with the asset themselves. So they're kind of made to where you're gonna have to go in and plop down any trees or any fences along with like a driveway or something like that. And when you look at these rural streets of Japan and you get down into the street view, there is a lot that's going on around these houses. It's never just like a house that's just sitting on grass, and that's going to cause a lot of problems as I continue to build the city and try to build it, I guess, in a quicker way. Yes, I can take the time to detail every single house, but that's going to take a lot of time and it's going to become very tedious, and honestly, I'm just going to get exhausted from doing it. That's why I'm going to continue to basically use the other pack that I have and then randomly sometimes put in a new house and detail it up. So I'm going to try to keep variations. However, in areas of the city where I'm not going to go around very much, it's mostly going to be aerial shots. I'm just going to use the other pack that has those fences and shrubbery that's already built into the asset. So this little neighborhood was basically my test run for the way that the rest of this rural area is going to look. And after completing it, I really didn't like it. I thought the housing area looked fine, but the farm fields just looked completely off and it did not look good. Almost like a kid in kindergarten coloring in the lines. And when I detail cities, that's not what I want it to look like. So it was time to pretty much erase everything that I just did, except for the houses. We'll leave those in. So it was back to the drawing board. I went back to the Steam Workshop and started searching through the farm fields that they had. I knew that I wasn't going to be able to find exactly a rice field, but we're going to have to find something that kind of gave it that same feel and same texture. I found this farm fields textures pack that's made for Theme Mixer. I thought it looked pretty cool in the workshop, so I decided I would give it a try. And I knew that since we were on a area with a lot of different terrain, that it would just conform with the terrain, and I knew that's what I wanted. So that was going to be square one. Then I found this pack called Farm Decals Pack, and I knew that this is exactly what I wanted. It was going to allow me to place it onto different terrain heights and still conform with the terrain. And it wasn't necessarily a rice field, however, most of it is just dirt in different configurations. And when you look at Google Earth, that's typically what you're going to see anyway. So I thought it looked really good. So I started off by laying down the decals in those rectangle shapes that you see in Japan, and I put them over that texture that we put down earlier. I don't continue this out throughout the build because I just kind of think it's unnecessary, but for the next few clips it's going to be in there. But after putting down the decals, I had to figure out how I was going to work in those canals and actually make it look good, or at least try to. So after playing with the canals, I decided on this method where I would just sink one underneath the other. And I thought that it looked pretty good. I found a couple places in Japan where you actually do see this. So this is how I'm going to continue throughout this build on building these canals. Basically by separating each field with one canal going down one way and then again another canal on top of it going across the other way. And then ultimately just filling in the entire block with different fields and different shapes. And then in the areas where the road meets the field, there's going to be like a little bit of a gap left over. So in those areas, we're going to add vegetation and trees to kind of fill it in and make it blend seamlessly. So now that I knew exactly how I wanted to create these areas, it was just time to replicate it by adding in more residential homes with these like neighborhoods that have these odd shaped roads, and then just adding in those farm fields that kind of contour around all of them. Alright, so as we watch the time lapse, let's talk a little bit about Japan's agriculture with some interesting facts. So as of 2018, Japan produced 9.7 million tons of rice, which is actually the 13th largest producer in the entire world. They also produce a substantial amount of sugar beets, about 3.6 million tons, which is used to produce sugar and ethanol. Another thing that I learned and that I found pretty interesting was they produce about 208,000 tons of persimmons. The persimmon is an edible fruit, which I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Shaped like a tomato, it's actually a berry. They're leathery and glossy on the upper surface and brown and silky underneath. But for the most part, rice paddies occupy most of the countryside, whether on the plains, terrace slopes, the wetlands, or the coastal bays. Non-paddy farmland share the terraced and lower slopes, and are planted with wheat and barley in the autumn, and with sweet potatoes and vegetables and dry rice in the summer. Intercropping is pretty common. Such crops are alternated with beans and peas. So I guess the last fact that I wanted to point out that I found very surprising is that historically and today, women farmers outnumber male farmers. Government data from 2011 showed that women heading more than 3/4 of new agribusiness ventures. That is mind-blowing to me because most of the farmers that I know in real life are all men. If you're from Japan and you kind of see this on a day-to-day, I'm generally curious to why that is and what your opinions and thoughts on it are. So even though I am like your pretty typical average American, I really do love learning about different and new cultures. I've been to several different countries throughout my life, to include Japan. And I always find it really interesting to learn like new facts and new details about the different countries that I go to. Here on my computer desk, I have a bunch of different items from like all the different countries that I've gone to. So a couple cool things that I do have from Japan is this manga, which I honestly have no idea what it is. Maybe someone in the comments can throw it down there. I went into a bookstore and I saw the cover and I thought it looked really cool, and so I grabbed it. Another cool thing that I have is this box of Lucky Strikes, which they were actually made famous during World War II because they were a pretty popular cigarette to smoke for all the soldiers. However, the brand ended up getting sold out and you can't really see them or buy them in the United States anymore. But for some reason, they're pretty popular in Japan, so I picked them up. And even though I don't smoke myself, I think it's a pretty cool collectible to put on my desk. Alright, so I really like the way that turned out. And I guess basically from this point, I just want to go ahead and fill out all of this general area with basically the same thing. Farm fields mixed with these little residential areas. I'm not going to cover like this entire area. I want it to slowly transition from less farm fields and then more into more residential and then commercial. So without trying to be too repetitive in this, I did want to start adding some like apartment complexes, or at least some like higher residential, or I guess mid-residential buildings, just to kind of like, you know, keep the variation up. But for the most part, again, I still am using the original housing pack that I started off with. They just look really good in these like areas like this. And then again, with the buildings that don't really have the props that are like around them, I try to add in just a little bit of detail. But from like an overhead shot, you're not really going to notice them that much anyway. I did add a parking lot right here, and I don't know if this is like kind of true to how it would be, but you have to like imagine that the people who live here need to park somewhere. So maybe it's going to be like one of those like small Japanese parking garages, but I just feel like in like a rural area like this, they wouldn't have that. So I'm just going to stick with the parking lot and try to find some examples in real life that I can kind of go off of. With the roads, I'm trying to get like a different shape in each little area just to create like a variation style. So when you're looking at it, it doesn't look repetitive. And with these buildings of this asset pack that I'm using, there is different shapes like 4x4s, 4x2s, 3x4s, 3x3s of buildings. And I'm trying to kind of give it a chance for all the different types of buildings to fit perfectly like a puzzle in this area. I will say that the one little bit of detail that I haven't added yet to any of these areas is power lines. In Japan and just in Asia in general, pretty much every street has power lines. That's one thing I definitely noticed when I was over there in Thailand, the Philippines, and Japan, that you see those power lines like everywhere. And so I need to come back in and make sure I add those just for that sense of realism. Alright, so I laid down some more fields as well as a bunch of housing just around the area. I guess kind of my plan is to go ahead and fill out like all these big areas down here. I just want them all to basically have fields with housing just kind of like spread throughout. And I'm not actually going to get it done in this episode. Believe it or not, these fields take forever. It's kind of, I don't know, it's just really tedious, and it's like, it's not hard, it's just a lot of work to like get the squares just right and then make the shapes. So I'm just gonna kind of slowly work on it throughout like the next week and the next month, just to kind of like fill in this area here. But that being said, I guess I also want to start filling in like these areas with more denser residential and start adding in some more commercial. So eventually we can work our way up into this area right here where we're gonna have, you know, our city. Alright, so the last thing that I'm gonna do is just add power lines throughout the area and into like these little residential neighborhoods. And before I sign off, I just wanted to say again, thank you guys so much for watching the video. Let me know what you guys want to see in this series and also in other series, whether that be City Skylines 2 or City Skylines 1. Which do you prefer? And if you would, please leave a like, and we'll see you in the next one.